All right, everyone, we are going to have our part one of the DLP. We have to do this in two parts here, and I'll explain why, and it's relative to what I call the Microsoft Minute. If we want to make sure that this goes as smoothly as possible, we do have to separate these into two different sections. And I'll explain why as we go through here. But as always, we're going to go ahead and log into the portal. Just as we do, we're going to log into the admin side. And then we're going to log into the compliance side, which again is down here. Inside of here, we have already looked at the data classification, so we've looked at the types of data that we're going to look for, the sensitive information types, trainable classifiers, and such. Now, we don't really have a whole lot of time to play around with trainable classifiers because those take weeks, sometimes months, to fully learn. So it's just kind of outside of the scope of what we're dealing with here, but we're just going to use the standard sensitive info types. Exact same concept here would be for the trainable classifiers. But if we start off, we're going to come down here to data loss prevention. And we're going to give this just a second to load up. And once it's loaded up here, there's lots of different ways that we can go about doing this here. Now, unfortunately, just because of the way that we're working on here, we have already enrolled a device and everything into the portal. But one of the things that in order to do the endpoint DLP, we do have to enroll one of our devices. And as I said, we've already created that. That was a completely different lab lecture combo. So what we're going to do here is just keep basically not necessarily talk too much about the DLP, but we will talk about what it can do, but we're not going to demonstrate it and set it up in a lab environment. It is just a little too much difficult for kind of a generic lab or even a beginner class as that we're doing here. When I do my more advanced courses here, we absolutely will, but you will be expected to have different resources then. So what we're going to do here is we're going to start off over on the policies tab here. And we will have default policies for Office 365, DLP, Teams, and devices. Now these are default ones here that were created when the tenant was spun up, so yours are probably going to have different modified dates and such. But what we're going to do here is work through a couple different things. So what we're going to do is we are going to create a brand new policy, and we're going to create this for Exchange. Now, we're not worrying about these policies here because they're just default. They're fine. But we'll go through those and essentially what they do. But we're not really going to focus on what that is because we don't really care. We want to create our own specific ones. So we're going to go ahead and hit Create Policy. Now, it's going to start us off here with a template. And we can use a template. However, we are not going to use a template here in this instance. But what we're going to do here is we're just going to go through some of these. So templates are a combination of sensitive info types that is specific. So these templates here are going to be specific to the compliance, the actual compliance rule set that you need. So for instance, we'll use medical and health. We have lots of different ones here, and I'm just going to focus this to the United States for now. And if I come over here to medical and health, we will have the HIPAA, which is Health Insurance Act, which is really around, again, healthcare fields. So again, in this instance, if I just do a single click, here are the things that we're looking for. We're looking for, obviously, the Health Insurance, Portability, and Accountability Act, also known as HIPAA. Just an enhanced template. There are lots of different things, and they actually have this new one here where we have a template with a trainable classifier for business healthcare, which is a new thing. So if we do put this out in the tenant, we would have a new trainable classifier at the top here, and that's a brand new thing that they just added. But looking at it here, we have PII identifiers. Well, what the heck is that? Well, those are going to be full names, addresses, and such. We're not going to look at those here, of course, but I just want to give you an idea here what these templates are supposed to do. So we have full names, medical terms and conditions, physical addresses, ICD-9-10, so that's International Classifications of Diseases, and again, these PII identifiers are going to be kind of the standard, what I call the usual suspects, credit card numbers, social security numbers, those things that are like the pattern-based pieces that are attached and in combination with a full name or an address. There's a lot of variables to that one there. We can go to, for instance, privacy. Patriot Act. This is just a standard PII one, which is just a good one that just kind of builds off of, just a a random, like a lot of my customers are like, well, we just want to be able to shore up our posture on just, PII or just these things here that we're not necessarily going to align to a specific verticality. Well, here in this instance, PII is everybody. Every organization really should be doing some sort of privacy protection. So we have ITIN, social security number, passport number, full name, physical addresses, as well as they have a trainable classifier, which is business-HR. So again, it's another trainable classifier that we have on here. So again, just to show you, these are just the categories of templates that are there. They're different sensitive information types and trainable classifiers added together to be able to pick this up. So what we're going to do here, we're going to create a custom policy. And we're just going to click custom policy. And we will hit next. Now, it is always a good practice. Now, what I do here whenever I create DLP policies, I never actually create them for kind of blanket across the board, like here's everything. I don't like doing that. I actually like creating ones for specific services. So for instance, in this example, we're going to use Exchange. So what we're going to do here is we're going to call this, we'll call this just PSP dash Exchange dash credit card. Actually, you know what? We'll just do PII. So again, the organization, Exchange-PI. Now you can do PSP if you want, obviously, but my tenant is just Pox Square Professor, obviously, so I just put it there. You can call whatever you want there. I'm not going to give it a description. We don't really care because, again, this is just for testing purposes. Description's really only for administrators. Users don't see this anyway. So, and then we're going to do PII, personally identifiable information. Go into next. Locations we want to apply. Now, as you see here, holy Toledo, we have a lot of stuff. Okay, we have a lot of settings inside of here. Remember, this one I like to make it specific for emails, and then I'll create one for files, and then we're going to create one for chats and channels. So these devices here, this is endpoint DLP. Defender for Cloud Apps is going to be the CASB solution there. And then on-prem repositories, that actually requires the AIP scanner, which is way outside of the scope of a beginner course here. We will do that in future courses. However, that's going to be a more advanced feature and more advanced functionalities. We're not really going to focus too much on these here. So we're going to uncheck pretty much everything except for Exchange. And then we have a whitelist and a blacklist. We can't have both. We can include a distribution group, so we can specify that only these people are the ones who are going to get this policy, or we could say everybody and exclude specific people from the policy. In this instance here, we're going to just bridge this pretty much across the board. It's a lab environment, not the end of the world. It's really not that big of a deal. So what we're going to do here is we're going to just keep it scoped to everybody, and we are going to exclude none. Let's keep it default here. Keep in mind, this is only be through distribution group, not security groups. Hit next. Obviously, we don't have any templates. We did not choose one. We did a custom. So our only option here is to create a custom one. So we hit next, and then here's where we create the rule. Now, DLP works on conditional logic. It's basically if then else statements. Okay. So what we're going to do here is we're going to hit create. First thing we have to do is give it a name. And again, I'm just going to align it with the name of the rule here. We will do, we'll do Exchange-PII. Now I'm going to actually specify here where I say low count. And this is going to be important for us to understand on how this works out, because what we're going to do here is we're going to do a high count and a low count. And this is a very common scenario here, is that sometimes we do, as an organization, we want to, and we're going to allow people to send out a document that has one in it, one social security number or one piece of PII in it, because it's a legitimate business use case scenario. But if they are sending out multiple, then what's going to end up happening is that we have to, maybe if there's going to be more than just one, we're going to say, hey, you can't send this out. We can block it. So we can do it based off of the count, the number of hits that it happens in here. And we're actually going to separate this between one, and then we'll do one with, we'll do 5 or less. So what we're going to do here, we're going to hit conditions. We're going to hit create condition. And here's all of the conditions that we can do. This is incredibly complex. These are very niche in my personal opinion. Again, we're trying to make this as a blanket DLP policy here. We're not trying to get crazy, not get convoluted. We can, okay? What we're going to do up here is we're going to do content contains, so the very top one. Now, if yours doesn't have all of these pieces, oops, didn't mean to do that, all of these pieces here, it's because you did not scope it to Exchange. So you need to go back and make sure that you do see these here. Then what we're going to do, content contains, and we're going to add. And we can use a sensitivity label, a trainable classifier, or a specific sensitive information type. So what we're going to do here is we're going to hit sensitive info types. Now there's 307. We looked at these. Remember, we created that additional one with the project X. And we're going to actually choose that as one of ours. So we're going to go ahead and we'll choose ABA routing number. We're going to type in project X. I think we did X, right? Yeah, project X. We can put a little check in there, and you can see this is cumulative here. And then we're going to do U.S. because this is going to give us our US ones. Passport, bank account, drivers, ITIN. We don't care about physical addresses. We're not going to touch that one. That one always gives a ton of, especially in email, a ton of problems, because most of the time people in their signatures have like an address, you know, and a lot of people have that in their address, in their signature, in their email. So physical address is going to trigger almost every time, and we never ever really want to see that. That's annoying. We're only going to focus on Social Security numbers. So there's 7 total that we have chosen, and you can see right here is that we got the passport number, bank account number, driver's license number, ITIN, Social Security number, project X, and then ABA routing number. Now, if you did not create the project X, go ahead and make sure you watch the last lab, the previous lab, because we created it there. Now, since this is a low count, remember, I'm going to skip over confidence here for the time being, but since this is a low count, what we're going to do here is we have currently right now 1 to any, which is literally if you have any of them in there. So we're going to actually create this as 1 to 4, since this is a low hit. This one's really weird. You have to highlight the whole thing and then hit the 4. Like you can't even delete it either because it yells at you. So just highlight the whole thing and select 4. Now in this instance here is it's going to be any of these. We can do all. Now obviously this particular, in order to trigger this rule, it's going to have 1 to 4 of every single one of these. That doesn't make sense. We want any. So if it contains any of these here. So this is the beginning portion of the string that we're pulling together, the condition string. So we're going to just close that up for the time being because we want content contains any of that sensitive information. Again, I did say I was going to skip over the confidence here, but again, we're all going to keep these as tenant default, which are medium for all of these, except for that project X, which we created as a low confidence. But we're going to keep these all at medium confidence. We're going to just minimize the content contains because we're actually going to add another condition. Here's the thing. If I were to send an email that has the sensitive information in it, but I were to send it inside of the organization, who cares? That is safe. That is still within the boundaries of our organization, the logical boundaries. So what we're actually more focused on here is that if content is shared from Microsoft 365. So we have 2 options here. Detect when content is sent in email address, Teams channel, chat message here. In this instance, it's only going to be email. But if we drop this down here, it's going to be with people outside of the organization. So in this instance, we are saying that if it contains sensitive information 1 to 4 of any of these here, under these confidence levels, content is shared, so it has to be and, we have a conjugator here, which is and the content is shared from Microsoft 365 on the outside. So it has to contain sensitive information and be shared externally. Those are 2 big things that we got to look at here, because again, internally, I don't really care if that's shared internally. Yes, I could stop it if I want, but that's going to be a big problem, because there are times when HR or, depending on the scenario, if you're like a hospital or something, you're dealing with this stuff all the time. Same thing with banks, you're dealing with this stuff all the time, and yeah, you should be able to send it to people inside of the organization. So, all right, so here is the if statement. Here's a condition. If it contains this and if it contains this, then we're going to do something. So we also have the ability here to create an exception. So a lot of times what I see here is that we will have specific people. Well, let's just say if we hit add an exception, we can have specific people be exempt from this policy. Maybe, but probably not a good idea. we have the ability to say that if the sender, we'll say the recipient domain is. So here's a safe list of people that we add and you are allowed to send to. So again, here's like a safe domain list of, here are the people that we send the most to, and here is that kind of whitelisted, if you will. Another one I have seen, which I'm not the biggest fan of, but you could, where we can do a, let me see if I could find it in here. There's a whole bunch of them, as you can see, but the one that I'm looking at is if the subject or body contains words or phrases. A lot of times what I see here is we will say, we'll put no encrypt on the message, so it doesn't encrypt it. The user's overriding it. I don't like doing that because that encourages users to just do that all the time. I'm not the biggest fan of it. There's actually another way that I recommend doing it, and I'll show you. So looking at what we have here, we have the condition. We are not going to put any exceptions. So we're just going to go ahead and just keep this clean here and minimize exceptions. We have the if statement. Now what we're going to do here is we're going to create the action. We're going to hit add an action. Here's all of the stuff that we can do. Okay. We can restrict. We can set it as a specific header, remove the header, redirect the message, forward the messenger to approval, or forward the message for approval. That may be. We'll get to that here. But again, think about the logic behind this one here. This is a small amount of sensitive data that is being shared out. If it's more than that, then at that point there, maybe we want to do something different. But in this instance here, we're going to do this very top one, restrict access or encrypt. So here is the cool part about this here. We're going to go ahead and restrict access, so put the little checkbox in there. And it says, hey, we can block people from accessing it. Excuse me. So you cannot, the user, when they get the email to say you don't have access to us, you cannot do this. What we'll do here is we don't want to do that. We don't want to block people on the outside. We don't want to block everybody. We do want to send this outside of the organization, but we want to do it in a safe manner. That's where we're going to get this. Encrypt the message. And as you see here, we have lots of different ways of encrypting. We're just going to do a very standard encrypt tag. That's it. Yours is going to be on here. These two here are part of the Office message encryption, or actually it's the advanced message encryption suite. We're not going to focus on those too much here because we're going to actually be using the information protection labels. But for now, we're just going to put encrypt. Those are a little bit different. So we're not stopping the user from sending out that data to the organization. What we're doing here is we are encrypting it. Meaning, and we're going to go through the encryption process, but that's what we're going to have the part 2 on because we had to wait for replication and such. We're just going to create all the policies right now, and then we will have our part 2 where we actually dive into what's the user's experience. But again, in this instance here, we're just going to restrict access. We're not really restricting access, we're encrypting the content. Okay, so at this point here, again, we're in email only. This is why I separate email from the other ones, is because this encrypt email message only applies in Exchange. If we are including OneDrive and SharePoint on this here, this won't be available to us, which is why I like separating them. So we are restricting access. Okay, that's all we're going to do. We're just going to encrypt the email going outbound. Let's go ahead and minimize that, close that one down, and we'll close this one down here too. Again, I like to keep this neat and tidy here because it's a little bit easier to see because there's so much going on here. So we have here user notifications. Use notifications to inform the user and help educate them. So we can hit yes. And this is absolutely what we want to do. We want to do a couple of different things. We can send them an email. The email you just sent contained sensitive information and was encrypted. Just a little email. We customized it. Notify the user who sent, shared, or last modified the content. So this really applies to, inside of Exchange here, it's who sent it. They are going to get an email in their mailbox right after it gets sent, and it says the email you just sent contains sensitive information and was encrypted. Now here's the other thing we can do. This is always after they hit the send button. Sometimes we like to do this in line. So we hit this little checkbox here for policy tips. Policy tips actually show up as the document or as the email is in use. Now we will demonstrate this, of course, but as the information is in use, this email contains sensitive information and will be encrypted once it is sent. Okay, so policy tips, there are actually a little API notification that pops up on the client while we're using it, and it says, hey, it's going to say, before I hit send, as soon as I type in the sensitive information, well, within, we'll say near real time, and we'll show you what that experience is that in near real time, the policy tip is going to pop up, and it's going to say, hey, it contains sensitive information, and it will be encrypted when you send. So before they actually hit send, it's going to pop up for them. This is a great way of educating users, a great way. Caveat to that there is that policy tips are only supported in certain circumstances, one of which is Outlook on the web, perfectly supported there. We also have some other scenarios too where it's potentially not, and that's really around outside of the Office suite. Anything inside the Office suite, SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, those are all going to work, but if we start getting outside of that, that's where things don't really work too nicely. Okay, so we are notifying the user with an email after they send, as well as while they are in line and type in that information. So we're going to go ahead and minimize the user notification as well. We have user override here. We have the ability to allow users to override. Now we are not going to do this, and we actually cannot, even if you click on it here. That is because inside of Exchange here, when we use the encryption, it is not going to, that is not something we can override. So we're just going to minimize this here for the time being because, again, it doesn't matter. User overrides we're going to play with later. Finally, we have incident reports. Okay, so use a severity level for an admin alert. So we can say that this is high, medium, or low. In this instance here, since we are encrypting it out, it's going to be a low alert. I don't think it's that big of a deal. We have several different ways that we can do this here. We can send an alert to admins when a rule match occurs. So when this triggers, we can say that, hey, every time that somebody triggers this rule, we're going to get an email. If you imagine that is, well, it's quite annoying actually, because again, this is a very simple rule and this is supposed to be blanketed. It's applying to everybody. Do we really want an email every time somebody sends this? Because in a large organization, this can be, you could be getting inundated with alerts. Do we care about that, really? Because again, it's not the only way that we're going to be able to track these. Remember, we are doing these as an alert as well, so we'll be able to track it in the portal too. I am not the biggest fan of doing these here, so we can do several different ways, but since this is a low count, it's going to happen a lot. Worst case scenario, we can send an alert when it hits a threshold. So we can say that if it's been 15 times during the last 60 minutes, then we'll get an alert. We can also do volume, but that's not really that big of a deal. I don't see volume too much. That's really around the idea of documents and such. But, you know, in this instance here, we can do these. And I'm fine with it. I don't think that's that big of a deal, but I just don't want to overly alert our administrators because they get numb to administration alerts. We get so many of them anyway. I'm not the biggest fan of doing this. So I'm actually going to just shut these off. I don't want that. However, we do have an option, which we'll do for the second one here, is to use the email alerts. So these are incident reports. These are different than alert reports. These are going to be incident reports. They're actually going to have a copy of the content and such. We're not going to focus on this one here, okay? Because again, this is a low count. I don't want to inundate our administrators. And then the final piece that we have here is additional options if there's stop processing additional rules. We're just going to leave this one as it is. Let's look through this one last time just for your, so you can follow through here and follow along. Conditions. We have these conditions, and feel free to pause here so you can continue going on here. Instance counts of 1 to 4. Make sure it says any of these up here. Confidence levels, keep them as the tenant default. So if it's going to contain any of this sensitive information and content is shared with people outside of the organization. We are, why did you do that? We're going to encrypt using encrypt. I don't know why that just got rid of that. So we're going to encrypt. User notification, we will send a notification to the user after they send it and during the customization of it. We can customize the email subject. That's okay. We don't need to get too crazy with the user's experience there. Again, we don't want to scare the users, of course. So, coming down here, we are not providing any user overrides. We are not doing any incident alerts, and this is going to be a low priority incident. Because again, these should happen, that's fine. They're just for logging purposes. That's all we're concerned about. Once we have that, go ahead and hit save. Clicked it twice there. So we should have a low confidence, a low number count. You'll see just a little bit of an overview of what it can do on here. So it should look very similar to the way mine is. We are going to collapse that and we're going to create another one. But first, I'm going to snag this. Quick Control C, create a new rule, paste it in there. I'm going to replace low with high. So, condition, content contains, just as we did before, sensitive information types, ABA routing number, project X, U.S. passport number, bank account, drivers, ITIN, skip over physical addresses, social security number, hit add. Now remember, we did 1 to 4 for the others, so what we're doing here is going to be 5 to any, which means basically 1 to 4 is going to trigger the first one, 5 to infinity will trigger this one. So we're covered here. We have 2 separate rules based off of what's going on. So we got the content contains. One last piece here, content is shared with people outside. So we're going to minimize the condition. Now in this instance here, so this is a higher count. So there's a couple things that we can do here. We can deliver the message to a hosted quarantine, so it can hit the quarantine first and managers have to approve it or other people have to approve it. We can modify the subject. We can forward it to a specific approval list. We can actually, if we want, to restrict access and then block everybody. So what's going to happen here is this one's a little weird. They won't be able to exchange, won't be able to send to recipients inside or outside your organization. Or we can block people only on the outside. So you will not, only users in your organization will receive it and have access to the files, other people will not. So there's a couple ways that we can go about doing this here. Most of the time it's easy to just block people on the outside, and that's what we're going to do here for this particular policy. The other one, remember, we're encrypting. Okay. Now, this one here, and I'm just going to minimize actions. I want to make sure that that one stays on there. It doesn't, actually. It seems when I close it out, it doesn't. So, not a problem. We'll come up here. User notifications. So, yes, what are we going to do here? We are going to notify the user. We're going to customize the email text here is that this email contain sensitive information and cannot be shared externally. And then I'm just going to copy that, and we're also going to do a policy tip here too. I'm going to say it contains sensitive information and cannot be shared externally. So policy tip, as well as the email to the user. We have the ability to allow an override. In this one here, I will provide an override. So an override here is the user is allowed to override this policy. However, we are going to require them to have a justification in order to override it. So as they are typing it in, and they do need to send this out, okay? What's going to end up happening is to override this policy and send it outside of the organization, they have to enter a business justification. That business justification is going to be saved to the logs And me as an administrator can go in and say, oh, well, this person overrode it with this business justification. Audit trail. We're absolutely able to do that. Very, very powerful there. And I like this one here. All right, next, incident report. We are going to flag this one as a high alert. This is a big one here. It's a big deal. Send an alert to admins when the rule matches, and I want to be alerted every time that this one triggers. Remember, this is a high priority one here because we're sharing something out that could have hundreds of social security numbers or hundreds of credit card numbers in it. Much different than just 1 to 4. That is much different from it. So we can do this here where we have the incident alert, and then we can also add on top of that the incident report. So the incident report here by default is going to be set to the site admin, which is a group of people that, well, we're not really going to focus on these people here, but what we're going to focus on here is we're going to find our account. Oops, didn't mean to do that. I'll just hit Matt. Actually, you know what we're going to want to do? I'm sorry, I picked the wrong one. I didn't want to do the Matt. I want to actually do my account, not that admin account. I want to do my account here. Let's go ahead and hit add. Now, when this incident report gets generated, we get the name of the person who modified it, the type of sensitive information that was matched, severity level, here's the content, and also it's attached to it is this, so the item as well as the content that matched it. So it's going to actually put an attachment on there that could be a document. It could be the email itself. It doesn't matter based off of what triggered it. And additional options, we are not going to process anything else. So this is the way we're going to set this up, taking it from the top. Same exact conditions that we did before. Make sure you set it over here, 5 to any. And make sure it says any of these. And shared with people outside of the organization. Block people on the outside only. So again, we can share that internally, but we cannot share that externally. We're going to give a user notification and email. And then they're also going to get a policy tip. We're going to allow them to override it. We're going to send an email alert to the administrators every time that the rule matches. We can send it to additional people if we wish. We're going to send an incident report to this person, which is me. This could be a group of people like compliance people or something like that. But in this instance here, just going to put ourselves. And then we're going to save. It's going to take a second for this to trigger. And you will see that we now have a PII low and a PII high. So in terms of priority here, what ends up happening is that it looks for different scenarios. Now, since these are two explicitly different ones here, if there is a conflict somewhere, which again, this one, there wouldn't be a conflict, but if there were to be a conflict, it would go by priority. Top here is priority, bottom is least priority. So in this instance, we're just going to keep it as such. We're going to go ahead and hit next, and we're going to turn this one on right away. We're going to skip out testing. We do have the ability to do testing if we want, so it's not going to enforce anything. It's just going to say, you know, hey, if we were to put this on for administrators only, they were the only ones who would actually see anything. They would see when these things get triggered. But that's it. The users would have no experience on it. They would have no idea what's going on. But since we are just in a lab environment and we want to turn this on, it says it can take up to an hour. Now that is... I would say incorrect. So actually what we're going to do here is we're going to wait several hours, which is why I broke this into two separate sections. Go into next, and let's submit. Now, while we're doing this here, we're going to create two more policies, and we're going to get through them real quick. So just if you need to stop and pause while we're doing this here, I just don't want to drag this on much longer. But when we create the policies for SharePoint and OneDrive, and then we're going to create another policy for Teams, chats and channels. Going to hit done, and you will see that we have the PSP Exchange-PII. We're going to create a new one. Custom. I'm going to call this PSP SharePoint OneDrive PII. Same concept applies here. We're going to hit next. Now, just for the sake of making this easy, we're actually not going to make two separate policies inside of each one here. We're going to go ahead and get rid of everything except SharePoint and OneDrive. And by default, it's going to be everybody. we can, of course, segment this out here. But again, since this is a lab test environment, let's break it. Hit next. Create or customize the policy. We're going to create a rule. And PSP-SharePoint / OneDrive -PII. And we're just going to make this one blanket here because we want it to be across the board. Content contains sensitive info types. We're going to go with our usual suspects. Project X, U.S. That. Skip over physical address. We're not going to worry about physical address. Hit that. And we should have 7 of them on here now, I believe. Keep them instance count 1 to any. We're not going to create 2 separate ones here. We don't really, again, this is just to make it easier for all of us to play around in here. Is that, remember, this is for OneDrive and SharePoint. Now, in OneDrive and SharePoint, this really applies to me if I were to share out from the OneDrive or SharePoint site. Okay, so this one works differently. It actually uses the SharePoint indexer. So as the documents and such are being uploaded to SharePoint, and over time, and what I mean by that is that within minutes they are indexed and they are looked for and scanned for sensitive information. So if it contains sensitive information, and remember, we're going to share with people outside of the organization. Now real quick, I want to bring attention here to the condition. There's not a whole lot of options on here. Remember, we only chose SharePoint and OneDrive here, so there aren't actually a ton of information inside of here. Tons of conditions, excuse me. So we have it set here with these conditions. Keep everything like you see here on my screen. We're going to go to Actions. We only have this action. So if we restrict access, we can block people outside of the organization. Or this one here, which is helpful if you use the anonymous links. Now again, if you don't know how anonymous links work, or the anyone links, if you don't know how that works, that was something that we covered in our SharePoint discussion there, and that's probably a good section to make sure that you look at and check out, because our modern workplace there has a lot of information on how SharePoint works, and OneDrive, and Teams too. So we're actually going to just block people outside of the organization. So we're just going to keep it like this. That's all. User notifications, we're going to ahead and toggle that on there. We're going to give them a policy tip. We're going to customize the email. This document contains information and was not shared externally. So this is the email that comes after they try to trigger the policy. And then what we're going to do here is we're going to trigger a policy tip. This document contains sensitive information and cannot be shared externally. Do we want to give them an option here to override? You betcha. I absolutely always recommend giving an option to override here. We can track this. This is all trackable, remember. So if somebody just constantly overrides things and gives bad justifications, we can track that, and we have information. We have an audit trail on that. We can figure that out. Hey, this person is just constantly overriding these policies because they don't want to adhere to the policy. We can correct that behavior. Incident report. I don't know. Let's make this a medium. And we'll share it out. We'll get a every time that this rule triggers. Sure. We'll also do a email notification, an incident report here. So we're going to change from site admin. We're going to change this to ourselves. And then we're going to go ahead and hit save. Just for clarification here, if you need it, one last time. Conditions, we're going to do 1 to any here on this one. Content is shared externally. Restrict access. User notifications. Override, incident reports. Go ahead and hit save. Looks good there. We are going to next. All right, so we have covered Exchange. We have covered OneDrive and SharePoint, we have one last place we're going to cover, and that's through a Teams chat, of which I will show you how that works externally. So we're going to go ahead and hit done. And then the last one we're going to do here are Teams chats and channels. Create a policy. Custom. Custom. Next. PSP-Teams chats/channels. It's important that we differentiate between chats and channels versus Teams, because Teams contains files, but anything inside of Teams files is also stored where? SharePoint. And in that instance there, we are blocking SharePoint. Remember, we took care of it on the SharePoint policy, not on the Teams policy. These are only chats and channels. Go ahead and hit next. Going to go ahead and uncheck. As you see here, Teams chat and channel messages, uncheck devices, and on-prem repositories. We're going to apply this to everybody. Go ahead and hit next. Next. Create a rule, and again, Teams chat channel -PII. Content contains, this should be very similar to everything we have done so far, so it should be muscle memory for you. Project X, u.s. Make sure you type in u.s. if you haven't figured that out there. It does not actually figure out what if you just type in us. It'd actually be u.s. All right, our usual suspects. We're going to keep the instance count to any, 1 to any. Make sure it says any of these. Same condition here. Content is shared with people outside of the organization. I'm going to do an action here. Restrict access. Block people outside of the organization. User notifications. Yep, we absolutely will. Go ahead and put a checkbox in these. Now, here's one thing is that there is no email option here. There's only policy tip. This message contains sensitive information and cannot be shared externally. Do we want to allow overrides? As I said, 100%. Yes, we do. I'm going to create this as a medium. Send an alert? Sure. These are admin alerts here, just remember. Incident report? Yep, absolutely. We want to change out site admin for us. Scroll down and hit save. Now again, as I've done, content contains these, shared outside of the organization, block it, user notifications here, allow override, incident reports like this, save. Looks good here. Next, turn it on right away, and submit. Okay, so from the policies that we're creating, that is all we're going to do. I'm going to give you one little option here so we can look over so what we're going to do here is we're going to check, and check. And we're going to delete these policies here because we don't want them conflicting. Now this is the reason why I'm also splitting this out here, is because this takes time. So what we want to do here is we want to delete these policies. Make sure it's not the ones that we just created, it's these default ones. Yes, we want to delete these default ones. We don't want them to conflict. Now, it may take time for these to fully go away from your portal, which is why I'm separating this lab out into two different sections here. Okay. All right. Now, looking at what we have right here, here's 3 DLP policies that really increase our security posture by a lot. So let's go ahead and go over here to create policy. We're going to custom. Now I'm just going to show you what the client-side DLP can do. Client-side test. You do not have to do this here because we're not going to finish it, but I'm just going to uncheck everything. So devices here, we're going to just keep it on all users is fine. Oh, by the way, keep in mind that this is scoped to users, not devices. Just because it's a DLP policy, it is actually scoped to the user logged into that session, not the device. going to go ahead and next, create a rule. Now in this one here, we're going to notice that some of these are a little bit different. So we're just going to call this client test. Looks good. Conditions. So a couple different things here. We have some options. Is that the document is password protected, the user access a sensitive site from Edge. Well, what's a sensitive site? Well, that's a whole different thing. We're going to hit content contains sensitive info types, and big surprise here, we're going to use our good buddies, the usual suspects. And we're going to go ahead and hit add. Keep all of this just as default here. So, what are we doing here? All right, so the condition is if the person has a document or any content that hits this, what are we doing with it? Well, we're going to go ahead and go down to actions. We can audit, we can restrict access, or we can, again, audit or restrict access across sensitive sites, or sensitive, we'll do activities here, and I'll show you. So if it contains any of these things on here, if we are going to service domain and browser activities, detects when protected files are blocked or allowed to upload it to cloud service domains based on the allow block cloud service domains. And we don't have any cloud service domains yet. So in this instance here, we can just hit the to audit, but we certainly have the ability to block and override or just block outright. This is if they were trying to upload to a sensitive location like a personal Google Drive, a personal OneDrive, Dropbox, Box, something like that. We can set that up here. We can also, here, file activities. We can restrict activities here where, hey, we don't want them to copy to the clipboard. We can actually stop that, people from going into the thing, stopping the clipboard here. We can copy to a USB removable drive if somebody's trying to exfiltrate the data that way. That's an option we have. Copy to a network share. Again, another option we have. Print it. Maybe we want to copy or move using RDP, or again using an unallowed Bluetooth app. I don't see this one too frequently. This would be kind of like the AirDrop functionality though. It's an option. I'm going to put 2 checks in there, but we're only going to audit. We're not going to actually block or do anything here. We can play around with these different things here too. I'll give you a demonstration of what this looks like here, but when it comes down to it here, this is a little too difficult for you to get set up in your lab because it does require enrolling a device, which I'm not requiring you to have a device. We did set that up in the beginning with another lab. However, in this one here, I'm not requiring you to have your kind of a lab device or a virtual device because that requires additional effort and everything that's just outside the scope of this course. So we also have the ability to apps and restricted app groups. So for instance, maybe we want to have like OpenOffice or Notepad++ or something like that, an actual activity, an app that is not allowed here. Same thing here when it comes down to the restricted apps. Do we care about these? Do we not? We'll get to those in a second. User notifications, again, yes, we can do a policy tip here. Where does it show up in the policy tip? Well, there's some different things here. And it says sensitive data detected. You are not allowed to do that. We also have the ability to use policy tips inside of Office 365, so we can combine these, which is super helpful. So we can send an email. We'll just say device DLP does not allow you to do that. Customize a policy tip here, same concept. Allow override. Yeah, sure. Same thing here with the incident reports and everything. So as you see on here, these are all the things that we're going to do and we can do. This looks all very similar. They're just some of the actions that we set up here are going to be a little bit different. Now, what I'm actually going to do here is I'm going to save this because I'm going to show you what it looks like when I do the demonstration. But I actually only want this to be for one specific user. which is going to be Mr. Peart. Okay, now we're going to turn this one on right away. Now, again, you don't need to do this here. This is only for my demonstration for you so you can see how you do it. Now, if you want to do this, that's completely up to you, but enrolling your device into the portal and everything like that, that's a little bit outside of the scope of what we do here. So I'm not going to encourage you to go one way or the other. Feel free to if you want, but really just for the device DLP part, that's just going to be a demonstration here. It doesn't require you to enroll the device into Defender for Endpoint, which, again, we covered that in a separate section. That was nothing that I really want to continue doing because it requires a lot of extra effort. Now, we have this policy set up here. You may not. If you don't, like I said, don't worry about it at all. Here's another thing up too, and I just want to bring some attention to it. Automatically configure Teams DLP policy to protect files shared in Teams messages. Remember, when we're talking about Teams, here, chats and channels, a lot of people think, okay, well, if I'm covering Teams, chats and channels, it's covering my files. That's not the case. We can turn on automatic file protection, which the SharePoint sites and such will automatically be included in this. We are not going to do that, so we're just going to leave this off. However, it is a good idea to do this in the future. So it's in like a production environment. It's not a bad idea, but again, since we're working here, we have our own separate OneDrive and SharePoint policy here. We don't have to do this if we don't want to. All right, so we have the policy set up. Now we got to wait for that Microsoft Minute. So at this point here, this is where we basically are going to kind of stop. However, there's one last little piece I just want to show, and that's around the Endpoint DLP settings. So if we come over here to Endpoint DLP settings, this is where we can start getting some useful data. So we can drop this down here and allow advanced classifications here. This one is just a little piece here that gives us more detailed in the telemetry. And when we enroll a device into the Defender for Endpoint portal, what happens to it and what can we do with it? So we have advanced classification on these. We're not going to worry about that here. We certainly have the ability to exclude policies here, Windows locations, that'll be monitored by policies. Some of these are very noisy. In particular, device or the deleted items or the app temporary data. The problem with that is that stuff deletes over time, after you don't use it or whatever. And what happens then is we get a lot of alerts saying that somebody deleted a bunch of stuff. Well, in reality, they didn't. The operating system did because it was temp stuff. So we may want to add that exclusion in there, as that, like the temp files and such. Maybe we want to exclude those. We can do that for Windows, and that's right. Mac works. Device DLP works on Mac devices as long as they're enrolled in the Defender for Endpoint category. As long as they're enrolled in that portal there, Mac absolutely works. Windows works. Linux is coming down the pipeline as well. It already works. Linux works for some things already, but that's coming down the pipeline. Restricted apps. So in this instance here, if I wanted to add an app group like Notepad++, or for maybe OpenOffice or old versions of Office, I can put those in restricted app groups and restricted apps here. So we saw those rule sets already. This is where we set them. Unallowed Bluetooth apps here. Maybe if I want to shut these off, I could. That's fine. Browser and domain. Unallowed browsers. We only use Edge, let's just say, in an organization. Chrome is not supported, neither is Firefox or Opera or any of those. I can set this here where here are the ones that we are not eligible to do. So you cannot take that file that has sensitive data and put it anywhere in Firefox or in Opera or wherever. Same thing here with the domains, cloud service domains. This would be the location that you want to do it, like Google Drive or OneDrive or Dropbox, maybe personal OneDrive, maybe not business OneDrive, whatever. We can do that here. Same thing here with, so we talked about browsers here, and then service domains. These are risky, so maybe we don't want people to be able to do specific things on here for these specific domains. So it's a very similar scenario here. These two are very similar to each other. Moving down the line here, additional settings, business justification here. We can customize how it looks. Here's, hey, we want option 1. This is part of an established workflow, or I can customize it. hey, my manager has approved it. So we can give them options so they can choose there so they don't have to write in. That's helpful. It really is. And then always audit. This one is turned on by default. So anytime people are working on their device, as long as the telemetry is up and running and reporting to Defender for Endpoint, it is actually going to also report into the Office 365 portal. In the compliance portal here. It's also going to put it in there. So if a user goes in and deletes a bunch of stuff or does different things here, we're going to audit file activities. Not necessarily just sensitive, but just all file activities. So we could get a lot of data inside of here too. But by default this is on, and I think it's a good idea to do so too. So again, the device side, there's a lot of stuff we can do from here. It gets pretty in depth. I'm working with a couple customers on here, and this is some very advanced stuff to do, and I think it's really awesome. All right, we have covered the policies. We have created policies. Just the 3 is all you need. You don't need to do the client-side test. Alerts, we will see alerts over here when they get triggered. Right now, we don't have any, of course, but we will see them. And then we come over here to the Activity Explorer. This is the last piece that we're going to talk about here in this particular section. The Activity Explorer here is going to show all of the activity. So anytime anybody triggers a policy, anytime one of those work, remember before when we have a low count inside of Exchange, what happens there? Well, in that instance, it's going to trigger, but it's not going to send us any alerts or emails. It's going to generate it here, and we'll be able to audit. So we can do it for periods of time and lots of different scenarios. We have these really cool filters as well. All right, from a DLP standpoint, that is all we are going to cover here on this particular part 1. The next part here, we're going to wait. I recommend give it 8 hours minimum. Don't even touch it. Honestly, just come back tomorrow is the best way to do it. Is just give it a little bit of time, come back tomorrow, and then you can start playing around with the DLP side of things. But 8 hours minimum, because we got to wait for that replication to hit all the services that we just created these policies for. Give it time. That's all I can tell you right now. I'm going to wait about 24 hours. I'm going to come back tomorrow, and then we'll go through the testing process. So with that being said, we are good here for this particular first part of this lab. We're going to jump over into the second one there to get the user's experience, see what it looks like from the administrator side as well as the user side. That is everything here for this one, so thank you for it, and I will see you over on the next one.